Hey, hello everyone, and welcome to Creation Justice Summer Reads. My name is Derek Weston, and I am the Theological Education and Training Coordinator for Creation Justice Ministries. For those of you who might be unfamiliar with CJM, the mission of Creation Justice Ministries is to educate, equip, and mobilize Christians and Christian institutions to protect, restore, and rightly share God's creation. Today's program is the first part of a series exploring books on climate change and creation justice in conversation with the authors of those books. If you are interested in seeing previous of our webinars, you can go to our YouTube page. That's just youtube.com/creationjusticeministries. Please subscribe so you can follow along with any videos we share. And before we begin our conversation with our guest, a few housekeeping things to note. Please introduce yourself in the chat and be sure to select all panelists and all participants. We will have a short Q&A at the end of the program. Please submit your questions using the Q&A function and not in the chat. This workshop is being recorded and will be sent out to all our participants via email next week. Also of note, we still have copies of Talitha's book In Deep Waters for purchase. You can use the link that you use for registration to purchase a copy if you do not have one already. All right, I believe that is all of the housekeeping that we have for now. So it is my pleasure to introduce my friend, Reverend Talitha Amadea Aho. She's the author of In Deep Waters, Spiritual Care for Young People in a Climate Crisis. Talitha has worked with children and youth for many years as a Presbyterian minister in Oakland, California, and now serves as a chaplain at a children's hospital. She has witnessed the firsthand spiritual crisis that climate change has perpetuated in young people. Talitha, thank you so much for being here with us, and thank you for writing this book. I think it's such an important and timely book, and really grateful to have your insight and your presence here with us today.
Thank you so much, Derek. Thank you for the invitation. I'm excited to be here. I see my namesake there, Talitha Arnold, just got in the chat. Hi. Thank you for making this possible. Derek and I had a great conversation on the Food and Faith podcast, and so I'm just looking forward to another conversation.
Yes.
And to all the questions that people are bringing with them on their hearts today.
Yes. I was grateful for that conversation as well. Talitha and I went to seminary together, and so it was really good.
Played in the praise band together.
That's right. That's right. We have history. But I was very pleasantly surprised when In Deep Waters came out. Wasn't expecting necessarily this book from you, and was really pleased when I got a chance to, when you started announcing that it was coming out, when you started sharing what it was about. I'm always interested in what the genesis of a project like this is. What was going on in your world? What was happening in your work that made you feel that In Deep Waters was the book that needed to be written at this time in the place where you were?
Yeah, I'll give a friend credit for being like, telling me, Talitha, you look bored. I think you need some projects. What are some ideas of projects you could have in your life? I was a little stuck. And I was like, okay, well, maybe, I don't know, maybe I would write a book, or so I just had like put that in my mind. And we started a writing group, and I kind of reluctantly said, all right, I'll come. I'm social, I can hang out with people and have a writing group. And everybody else was doing like science fiction and stuff. And I was mostly writing like captions for our cat's Instagram. Like that's literally what I was doing in the writing group. Nothing very serious. But then at New Year's 2019, so it was like I kind of had that New Year energy of like, come on, do something important, like dig in, find what you're doing this year. And I had been with my family in New York. My mom was going through cancer treatment at that point. And I was flying back across the country, looking down on the nation and thinking about how it might suffer in climate change. And I just started writing this conversation that I'd had with teenagers in the car a few months ago. In November of 2018, in the middle of fire season for us in California in 2018, I had a really powerful conversation with the teenagers in our car who was like, what the hell is God doing? What is God thinking? And they said, well, I don't think God was thinking when God gave us the reins to this thing. So it was such a powerful conversation. And as soon as that pen hit paper, because it was paper, because I was writing like on a flight, I just, I started writing and didn't stop. It just flowed, and it suddenly became like, this is what I need to do. I can't afford to waste a conversation like that, which was so rich, inspiring, scary, important. I have to share this. I have to see where it's taking me. And so that's where writing the book started from.
Yeah. Even just that leads me a lot of places, but let's dive in a little bit to what were some of those conversations. What were you hearing from the young people you were working with? Let's put a name to some of the things that they were feeling, experiencing. What were you hearing in those conversations?
Yeah, they were challenging the not even omnipotence, but like anypotence of God. Like, did God have any power? Was God going to have some power through us somehow? Would God be able to help us in any way? Should we pray for rain, or is it cheating to pray for rain? I mean, are we just fooling ourselves if we pray for rain when all the meteorologists say there's no rain coming? And why would God let people have the power to play with fire so badly that we could actually trash the entire earth? Like, what does that story mean? So yeah, those were some of the things. And I kept digging and following up onto it as a pastor might do. We had sessions on our view of God. Does God work through us? Does God work in the world? And one of the teenagers very bluntly told me, she's like, yeah, I could get behind any of those scenarios except the ones where we're actually going to fix this, because we're not going to fix this. I was like, got it. Right.
Yeah.
I was still in my millennial naivete where I was still like, oh, we're gonna get together. That acceptance of the depth of the crisis had not hit me yet, and it is continuing to hit me and continuing to unfold.
I want to talk about that generational piece, because that is a huge part of the work of this book, is that this is in a lot of ways what you've offered us is an intergenerational conversation. And it was eye-opening for me when I read this that I think I had to start accepting how old I am, and that there are some generational differences between. I'm not one of the young people anymore, despite what the Presbyterian Church says.
Yeah.
But that there really are some significant generational differences. And you said this right in the intro of the book. The young people of today see the world through crisis-colored glasses. The illusion of stability is a foreign concept to Generation Z, born between 1995 and 2010. They know all too well how a virus can come along and rip the fabric of our society to shreds, while forests burn and shorelines wash away, leaving human and non-human creatures bereft in mourning. The young people of today are well acquainted with what it feels like when the world is ending. That blew me away, basically from the door. talk to us, because I'm going to go ahead and make an assumption that most of the folks who are on this webinar are millennials or older.
Oh, put it in the chat. What generation are you?
And if you are Generation Z, please let us know.
Yes,
But I'm going to assume that most folks are millennials or older. Talk to us a little bit. Oh, okay.
we got some Gen Zs. Thank you for being here. You get to put exclamations on when you're Gen Z.
My apologies for my assumptions, but talk to us a little bit about how the worldview that Gen Z is coming up with differs even for those of us who are millennials, in terms of being able to speak of optimism, in terms of being able to speak of hope, in terms of being able to speak of solutions.
Yeah. When I was growing up, we had a teacher in our school who taught recycling. Like, this was a class, was recycling and how important it is. And we didn't spend energy on the reduce and reuse and the other pieces of the 3 R's that we were supposed to. But for me, there was a sense of fearing like the trashness of the earth, like the ugliness of the earth. But even by my generation, the fear of outright nuclear annihilation was gone for the most part. And for those who did feel that, I really respect like the emotional anguish you went through with like drilling for nuclear war. But I also want to emphasize that was a binary situation. Like, you were preparing for a terrible thing that might happen. And it was like it could happen or not happen, which is different from the climate crisis, because we're looking at something that is not a question of whether it is or is not going to happen. It is happening already. It is in full swing. Even as we prepare ourselves mentally that the future may become unimaginably worse, but the climate crisis is already hurting people right now. So we're seeing that actively right now. But just to be young in this is so different than to be a little older. So we don't have, if you're young right now, you don't have that memory of thinking about, really the thing we should worry about is trash, or you don't have the memory of some of our less emergency things that we were worrying about. Like, it is only emergency and it's all the time. And I think COVID-19 just was a huge lesson as well for all of us. But imagine being younger in that message, that something could happen and change everything with, beyond what, sure, people warned, but this virus happened worse than people were warning about pandemics. And so just to know that things could be so much even worse than forecast, I think is a foundational lesson for Gen Z as they learn to just keep your balance, like surfing or something in a really chaotic world.
Yeah. I think that's so key. I have 4 kids, 3 of whom are teenagers, 1 of whom has been a teenager forever. And I grew up in a world, I grew up in a world where the environmental message, to your point, was about litter, like that we should not litter. And that was kind of the
save the world.
Yeah, and then if we just stopped littering, all of the ecological problems would be gone. And my kids are hearing a completely different message about global temperatures. They're hearing about biodiversity loss. They're hearing about wildfires. They're hearing about drought. They're hearing about flooding. They're hearing about things in so much more stark terms at a much younger age. And I'm interested in, I want to first talk about the psychological effects that has, and then talk about the spiritual effect that has. So from your work that you did with youth, what was the psychological effect of coming up in a world where these crises were seemingly all around, and there was no question about whether or not they're happening?
Yeah. Discouragement, depression, despair, anger, and anxiety, like grief, sadness, every big feeling you can feel, except happiness really is not there. So profound exposure and experience with a lot of negative emotions, that's psychologically destabilizing, and certainly doesn't help those who are already doing their work with a mental health diagnosis that is unrelated. It's really impactful.
Yeah. And so how were you taking that leap from the psychological impacts to the spiritual impacts? You've already said a little bit about the questioning of where is God capable, but in terms of their own spiritual lives and their own spiritual development, what do you feel was the effect of spiritual formation? How is that spiritually forming to be in that constant state of crisis?
Yeah. And as a professional pediatric chaplain, I want to say first that there's a continuity of spiritual needs with psychological needs. There's not a line at what that's. Sure. I'll bring psych in for that and keep the chaplain over there. No, the psychologists and the chaplains work very closely together, So I want to recognize that, and the social workers too, because your concrete human needs. Hi, Lynn's cat. Thank you for that comment. I really appreciate it. I feel that too sometimes. Just the nothingness of it all is very overwhelming. Lynn's cat put a bunch of zeros in there, but the social workers too, because people's physical needs and needs for housing, needs for stability, things like that are all also in continuity with their spiritual needs. And you can't have spiritual needs taken away from somebody's need for housing, people who love them, psychological well-being. And so that's also a handicap, and I don't, sorry, that's not the right word. It's a setback or a extra challenge in young people's spiritual lives, is that the world is profoundly unstable. So if you can imagine what unstable housing does to somebody's ability to access their own spiritual resources, you can also imagine what the existential insecurity of what is all of our human home going to be. So there's some of it feels like making young people grow up way too fast. It feels like forcing them into questions of urgency that we would prefer be reserved for later on the developmental scale, when your neurons are used to firing together a little more consistently, and you've maybe had a couple of foundational relationships that can guide you. So it's as if you have to jump into some existential big stuff earlier than we would like. But of course, we also know that is looking at somebody's life, you never know what's going to happen. When are they going to get a cancer diagnosis? Could be any age. When is there going to be a flood in their house? It could be any age. So big events happen like that. So, but spiritually speaking, a foundational thing is for young people and all people, but I feel like it's strongest with young people, to feel loved, to feel that you belong, to feel that you are welcome, and that there is a space for you. that you belong. And that's really hard to get that spiritual need met when the world is kind of unwelcoming. And even the grown-ups who say things like, "Oh, we're so glad you're here. Oh, we love you, young people. We believe in you." It's not quite the same welcome as, "Hi, how are you doing? What should we start with?" There's like, you arrive on any scene with a lot of high expectation already, which is overwhelming.
Mm.
And so I'm just getting started. I could keep going, but if you want to interrupt with another question, do it.
Well, I want to keep on this on this same vein, because I think I'm guessing again, I realizing that making assumptions here is dangerous, but a lot of folks who are on this webinar are thinking about their ministries and how do they do ministry in this context.
Yeah.
And a lot of this book is your response, reaction to these spiritual crises from your position as their youth minister. And so talk us through what were those responses? What was your ministry in that context?
Yeah, so and a really important aspect of my ministry, which is what used my chaplain training, was to let the youth group be a very safe space, to have check-ins almost every week, to have, you can share your rose thorn bud, share your great joy and your great despair every time, or almost every time we meet together. So building the emotional capacity of youth to listen to each other when they're crying, and the capacity to hear about really shitty things that have happened to their peers, and to just hold that space is really important. And I'm really proud of the youth for that. Like, they really leaned into that, and people would come to youth group when they were in the middle of psychological or spiritual crises. Instead of staying home, they would know that I could bring my gender dysphoria to youth group because we have spent so long practicing that. And maybe you don't have the words for it, but you can just pass and sit in a room full of people who love you. So that, I think, was the most important thing we could do, is build that capacity. We also had a robust tradition of affirmations. We didn't do it every week or anything, but on big trips and projects and stuff, we would be writing each other affirmations that they would keep, just to show them that we see who they especially are, and have them practice writing them for each other too. Like, we see you're different from each other. You have special things about you. We're so happy that you are showing up with whatever you brought this time. So the affirmations, I feel like, are another really important tool. And then just the work of finding what they had energy for. They had a particular energy for beach cleanups because they hate plastic trash with a passion. And they know that it's not going to clean up the ocean, but if we can just spend some time walking on the beach and like stabbing at plastic trash, like, that uses their physical energy. They're very physical people when they're teenagers. You gotta find that way to give them an outlet that they can feel in their bodies.
Even as you say that, it sounds very cathartic.
So nice. And we had an app too. So like, somebody would be like, "Yeah, I got another cigarette butt. Yeah, I got another straw." Because it's a little competitive and a little bit cathartic, and a little bit useful, but also very useful in terms of just shaping worldview. Like, what is your response to a mess? Is to clean it up, is an important frame of mind for young people to have.
Yeah, I think that's really important to be able to tap into that energy and use it in some way that feels somewhat productive in that space. That seems really key.
But if you've got a youth group in your church that doesn't sound like that, don't assume you have to make them into that. Like,
Yep.
The important thing is to see them and honor them and see what they are bringing and what they have to give. Because there's no one size fits all for this. Like, if you got really physical youth and a lot of feelings, like that's the kind of youth group you might have after my model. But others may be more into research and study.
But just kind of leaning into wherever that anxious energy takes them.
Yeah.
It's important to know the kind of hearts and motivations of the youth you're working with. There was a part of the conversation, the last conversation that you and I had, you mentioned an adult at a youth rally who was holding a sign, basically saying something about how essentially like the youth are going to save us, right? And that's one of those stories from that conversation that's stuck with me, because I feel like it's a thing that I hear all the time. The youth are going to save us, and it's on a myriad of topics. It's on race and gender issues. It's on the environment. It's on peacemaking. And I felt like your perspective on kind of dumping that on young people was a very needed thing that I kind of want to have you repeat, because I feel like it's important for those of us who, yes, we do see some progress, but progress isn't inevitable. It's not inevitable that the next generation is going to be more.
No, I don't think it's happening. No.
So there's that, but also it's a little bit of not doing our job. So yeah. I'm just kind of interested in kind of having you reiterate a little bit of your perspective on that kind of rhetoric.
Yeah. And I think a lot of the youth's response is no, thank you. You made this mess. How are you giving it to me? And I know some young climate activists right now who do not have energy for trying to combat big oil and gas. They just don't. I think they will still show up if you're shutting something down. Like, they'll still come to the streets and be there, but they're not going to organize it or invest in it. They are investing in survival communities. They're investing in small groups of mutual aid. They have such a different outlook, because they have unfortunately had to have more acceptance of the plight we're in than older people have. Older people are maybe being aware of it and maybe struggling for a little acceptance, but young people just gotta move past that and let go of the dream that this is fixable. We're not. We have already lost things that are irreplaceable. We have already lost lives to the climate crisis that. So even if we do a great job of carbon drawdown, we've still lost lives. This is not a binary situation in the future where if we do things right, we can avert a nuclear meltdown. So yeah, putting things on the youth as if their energy is going to save us, they're not actually going to be able to think about saving us all. They're just thinking about surviving. It's a different question. And I want to respect whatever it was that grown-up was feeling, because I feel it sometimes too. It's something like, wow, the young people are so cool. Like, that's real, okay? Yeah. They're really cool. They're awesome. They're breaking stigmas. They're like, they're doing things that previous generations wouldn't do. I love Gen Z. I really, really, really appreciate Gen Z and the work they're doing. And I want to honor that they have too many things on their plate. And they do not have enough resources, and they do not have enough support. So if you are an older person and you ever feel called to like stand on a street corner with a sign that's like, I love you guys, think about doing something else, like just giving them a lot of money, or like following their lead or something like that. Your encouragement might not be as meaningful as you think it is. They're not looking for that encouragement in the same way. Now, I'm not going to say stop trying to encourage them, but do try to be mindful of your own self and like how that shows up when you try to give encouragement. And remember what Greta Thunberg said when she was saying people are talking about giving us hope. I don't want your hope. Your hope is what got us here. Your hope in like the endless progress and that is what got us into this disposable earth mess we're in. I don't want that hope. I want you to panic. So if she's telling you to panic, you can just do that instead. And also remember that you can't, like, hope is not a thing we give. It's not an object. And what hope works for one person doesn't work for another person. And so you might feel like I have hope in the young people, but it's not the same hope that they're looking for.
That's incredibly profound. So what is the future that young people are expecting, and what decisions are they making towards that future about what they're going to do with their lives and what they're going to do with their families and what they're going to do with their resources? Because it sounds, again, I think they're making decisions that for previous generations feel alien, and maybe things we didn't have language for, before in the past. So in terms of thinking about their vocations, in terms of thinking about their families, in terms of thinking about the ways they acquire and share resources, like what kinds of decisions did you see that young people were making about what the future is actually going to be?
Yeah, this one is powerful, but it's also painful. So there are young people who are like, oh, the world is terrible. I know what I have to do. I have to become a lawyer to sue corporations on behalf of the earth, or, some, like, they have this goal, which is a kind of save the earth goal. And then sometimes they get burnt out because it's not the same goal as a sustainable lifestyle goal could be for them. There, those for whom it happens that their passion and their ability to make meaningful difference for the earth comes together, like those who are like passionate wildlife biologists and things like that. Those are really rare and amazing. And if you know one, please give them all the support they can get, because that's a really painful place where their job is to look at climate change, and they are tracking the species that will not survive. They are trying to figure out how these species are currently surviving, but they are not given resources to figure out how the species are going to survive. So good luck. That's very painful. And so anybody whose vocational calling aligns with something that feels like earth saving, earth changing, is really, you really need to give them a lot of support. And then, so I was at a Mennonite event this week. They had the Mennonite Youth Climate Summit. I don't know if any other churches have had a youth climate summit, but I would recommend it. It was awesome.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah. And after my speech, one of the teenagers came up to me and like trembling and tearful told me that their friends kind of looked down on them. Oh, too bad you don't care about the environment because you just want to be a teacher. And saying, because they the friends, this person's friends are going into careers that they don't actually like, but because it feels so urgent to save the earth, they're going to do it. That's a lot of passion. It's also a lot of pain. And I gave this teenager a hug, and I said that there are really important things for teachers to do. And I think we need to say this over and over again. There are really important things for teachers to do, and farmers to do, and scientists, and like those whose spiritual gift is making noise in the streets. Those are not all the same people. And sometimes we think we confuse like extroversion with being a good activist or something. Like, I am very happy at it with a couple thousand people in the streets, and my phone rage tweeting away, or whatever we're going to do now that we don't use Twitter. I haven't figured it out yet. I haven't, but like, I still want to rage tweet. Okay. So there's a real sense of urgency if you're maybe 18 or 24 or something like that right now, and you're trying to get yourself lined up for your job that you want to be a career, but the world is going to be unimaginable. So how do you prepare for a career in an unimaginable future? Like, I don't know what is going to be most useful. Our social worker is going to be super useful in the human safety nets that are going to start falling apart when this happens or that happens. Like, do you want to be a disaster prevention worker? Do you want to be in FEMA? Do you want, like, where is your calling? And some of the youth right now only have a sense that what they want to do is urgent, important stuff. And that is a little bit different from like the slower work of vocational discernment that we can help them do. I don't slow them down or anything. Don't put a spoke in their wheels, but they just know that they may be having burnout in that area, and offering them like real gentle, reflective, and permission to do something that feels like it's not the same as the urgent. But if we abandon like slower things, like, I don't know, researching or reading history, or like, I don't know, sometimes like the urgency of the ecological people gets like in conflict with like kind of the slower pace of the people who are doing indigenous land back work, because it doesn't go at quite the urgent pace. But those are really important together. And I just want to encourage people that we are a body that has many parts. And you want to protect your elbows that are out there in the streets. Like, we have lots of respect for the people who are the really noisy, like making a splash kind of stuff. But you got to have your kidneys too, that are just thinking about things and processing things, right? So there's fast work, there's slow work, and we need to have real respect and honor for the different calls that people are navigating when there's also this urgency and this great uncertainty.
Yeah, I really appreciate the way that you're articulating that. And I actually feel like the ability to do that slow work is a gift that older generations, and a gift that the church maybe specifically can offer. That my experience of the church is that we're often much better at doing the slow work.
Well, but slowly, that's for sure.
and doing work slowly.
Yeah.
But I along those lines, I'm wondering what else do we have to offer? I think we've already talked about we can't abandon the work to the younger generation. So on one hand, we have to keep doing the work. But what other ways can we come alongside? And again, I want to lean into your experiences of what ways have you seen it be helpful and beneficial for older generations and for the church to come alongside young people and support them in their efforts, and maybe even support them in their grief?
Yeah. There's a wildlife botanist at my previous church that she felt a little alienated from church at some points, but when the church started a climate grief spirituality group, she was at church every Sunday from then on. It just meant so much to be in a room with people who were older than her, who had experienced deep grief, and some were sharing about, like, when they were young, the campaign to save the whales or things like that. So yes, you can share your stories from other generations, but the important thing is that you share the depth of the grief and don't rush towards, and we're going to fix it, or progress, or the young people are going to save us. But to have a space where grief can be shared. Churches should be good at grief. I know that we're not always, but we are the places people come for funerals, and we have Good Friday services, y'all. Like, God dies. We should be good at grieving. So remember that, like, we have a lot about grief that we can, and we build the emotional capacity. Like, people who are not in churches don't necessarily attend so many funerals every year. But those of us who are church members, and even if you didn't know the person, but it's like your discipline is to show up for a church family's funeral. And to lament. Yeah, there's a lot of sacred texts. There's a lot in our Bible that is lamenting. And I would recommend a study on lament psalms with ecologically colored glasses on, something like that. Our friend Eric Clark, who went to seminary with me and Derek, holds a service of like a funeral service near All Saints Day for all the species that went extinct that year. So you can, bring that into the church, that remembrance there.
Yeah. I think that capacity, not just to grieve, but to hold grief, to let grief be okay, to let grieving be okay, because so much of our culture asks us to rush past grief and move beyond grief and pick ourselves up and
recover from grief. Yes.
Yeah, recover from grief. When really oftentimes what we need to do is sit in grief and make space for grief. So that's incredibly helpful. We're getting close to time. I want to we have some questions coming in. Want to encourage
we especially want the questions from the Gen Z folks, if you have them.
Yes. Now that we know that you're here,
thank you. You
identified yourself.
Your first right of refusal to ask the question.
But please make sure that you put them in the Q&A and not in the chat, so that we can sort them more quickly. I want to ask you, Talitha, one last question from me. What I think all of us are asking this question of, where do I spend my energy best? What's the best use of my time as we think about the climate crisis? I think you've already given us sort of part of the answer here of that we have to recognize our own gifts and abilities within the body. Mm-hmm. But as people are discerning the answers to those questions about where best to use their energy, what advice, what guidance would you give in terms of helping people think through that question?
Yeah. I want to separate two things out. One is a like save the world energy, and the other one is a live faithfully energy. And I want us to have both. And the live faithfully energy is where I put like that I mend my sweater instead of buying a new one, right? Corporations would love you to believe that that is save the earth energy. Is not. Like they would love us to tokenize our like, oh, I reduced a tiny bit of carbon. Aren't I great saving the world? Because that takes all the punch out of it. So I want us to have like, yes, I have an excellent compost regimen. Like I am growing food. I am, being a faithful steward of things that belong to me. And I try to dry my laundry, not in the dryer, like by line and things like that. And that's a faithfulness energy. And I want that to be a very calm energy, actually, in my life. I want this to be like, yeah, this is just what I do. And the save the world energy, although save is it's kind of, it's like it's an incomplete rescue. It's kind of like coming to rescue the things we can and know that we can't rescue it all. But I want that for activism, for research, for mutual aid, like local resilience, getting to know my neighbors, skilling up, like what are things because we don't really know. We know that we can expect chaos, but we don't know what we can really expect first. Like, is it going to be another pandemic real fast? Is it going to be food shortages real fast? Is it going to be fires here and floods there? Or is it going to be floods here and fires there? Like, but there are some like ways of skilling up. Like you can learn how to talk to your neighbors, how to organize. You can start attending city council meetings and calling them to accountability for what is their carbon drawdown plan, things like that. And you can just call your representatives. It's not that hard. Usually you get their voicemail. Like that's where the world saving energy goes, not on the recycling.
Yeah, that's a really helpful distinction, I think. And thinking about those faithful things that we do that become rhythms in our lives. And then kind of thinking through those activist pieces that are the rescue, the salvage of what we can salvage.
Yeah.
So I want to go and look at the questions that are in the chat real quick. Can you talk about if or how you address the power of expressing / releasing grief, lament, about the losses as a way to declare how much we love this world and be fueled by that love? What about the God of accompaniment who is sorrowful in solidarity with us?
That is a great comment. I love it. Yeah. It is, it's important to know that releasing our grief is healthy and it changes us. We're like spiritually healthier if we express the grief versus keeping it all bottled inside. And grief is the flip side of love. Talk about that in interpersonal things when in the hospital when somebody's dying. That grief is not different from love. It's just that's where it comes out at the end.
Yeah. We have one question here that I think maybe how are we defining youth?
It's going to depend on your context. So there are contexts where like the difference between high school and college is everything. So then you have a youth group and a college group, right? Because they have nothing in common. But there's other places where 21-year-olds are doing much the same thing as their 17-year-old cousins just at a different campus, like, so there's situations in which it's important to make some cutoffs. And I think it's important to look at the generations. I think Generation Z, who will be like 28 and down right now, 28 down to like 14, I think right now, have a different experience. So I know churches love to be like 40 and under, but I'm about to have to give up my card in the Young Clergy Women's International, and I'm bereft. I'm not okay with that. But it's that was in church leadership. 40 is generally what is seen as a benchmark, but I think looking at the generations is more helpful,
because again, generational experiences are where a lot of those markers come from, like people who grew up with similar life experiences and similar cultural experiences. Besides Lamentations, what other traditions and rituals of the church do you find helpful for navigating and strengthening the souls of youth?
Yeah, gratitudes, super helpful. Check-ins. So, more formally, prayer requests and joys and worries in the prayer request, but like less formally, check-ins, rose and thorn, and gratitudes and retreats. And then just think about a church service itself is soothing if it's done right. Like, we get some peace, we get some quiet, we get to sing together and have attunement, which is like physically feels good. It's kind of a way of co-regulating. Like, it's kind of the opposite of self-care, where like you self-care, you think, okay, I'm gonna put my earphones on and deep breathe. But like, we do that for each other when we have a church service together. If it's going well, we like think things together and we sing things together, and our bodies are quiet and active together. So that's like, I want to call it co-regulation, and like soothing just the pain of being in this world, is really helpful and strengthening the souls of youth.
Yeah, it's really good. We have a Gen Z question here.
Thank you.
First off, they mentioned that they loved your book and found it incredibly relatable and applicable, and would love to hear more about your theological understanding of salvation for the climate crisis. How do we understand salvation in a world on fire? You touch on some of this book, but I craved more.
Yeah. There's a salvation that is like eternal, just knowing like we're not lost. Even when we die, we're not lost. We are held in God's hands. Like, death is not the final word. That kind of salvation is really helpful. But then to also think about, like, if I go to church and I'm in great distress and I feel better at the end of the church service, church kind of saved me a little that day. Just like or if I am in need and the church meets my needs, that's just a little taste of the way we help and save one another. I want to make sure like there's little savings as well as big, like it's in continuity there. And I hope that like it's a taste of the same thing. Like, and I kind of, the way I imagine death, this might seem different, but it's like if your mind were to open, and this is kind of what people sometimes describe in a near-death experience, like if they see all their memories, and like time seems to have no meaning anymore. They feel like oneness and like connection with God in the universe and all that have been before them. Knowing that that's there, knowing that, and it's probably a taste of heaven if you want to talk about it that way, but like knowing that will be there for us, is salvation. And anytime we get a taste of that, we're saving each other a little bit.
I love that. How do you feel about encouraging youth to participate in creation care? youth-led, adult-supported, provide opportunities to participate. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
So if you've got like a youth versus apocalypse chapter in your neighborhood, or a 350.org or a sunrise movement, I encourage you to just start by following them and see what they're doing. Okay. Just put yourself on their mailing list, give them a donation, and you're paying for this service of staying connected to what actual youth in your actual area are already doing. And then I also want you to look at the actual youth in your church that you want to, I'm presuming that they're the youth in your church that you want them to participate, and look at them carefully, see them. Like, are they going to be very scared in the streets with a bullhorn? Like, don't send them there. If let's wait, let's work up to that. If they're going to be all about that, then we start there. But like, if they would like to research the rushes and phragmites that grow in your marshlands locally, because marshlands are really important in terms of in carbon, but also like flood resilience. So maybe they want to be doing a research and caretaking kind of project. Like, that is, you gotta see who the actual youth are and find out what they actually want to do. But give them money, okay? Give them money. Don't make them use their Starbucks money to do this, okay? Starbucks is like an important way of making yourself feel bad feel better at a bad day. So like, give them the money they need to travel to do these things. I'll name 350.org, Youth versus Apocalypse, and Sunrise Movement. And if you have researchy types, I will also tell them to look at Project Drawdown, which is drawdown.org, and just look at the different kind of climate solutions that are there and figure out which one they would like to connect with local people on.
Yeah, great. Elizabeth has this question: how do you respond to people, young or old, whose main response to the climate crisis is anger and thus throwing up their hands and doing nothing?
I'm going to ask you to deal with why you expect that anger is not the right response. I think that we as a church need to be comfortable with more anger. And when people are angry and other people around them say that anger is not welcome here, then they do nothing. But when people are angry and people around them say, I'm angry too, what should we do with our anger? Then it becomes channeled productively. So really, we all have to increase our capacity. We've talked about increasing our capacity to sit with grief. Can we also increase our capacity to sit with anger?
What is sustainability resiliency for our youth? How would youth define these terms? What do they look like for them? What are they looking for as we listen to them and support them?
That sounds like a great research project. I love those questions. I don't think I can answer them.
And that's fair.
I would, so sustainability and resiliency are lovely words. I would also ask them what is important for survival, because not all youth who are in the climate movement think about sustainability or resiliency. They think about survival. So I would also ask what those terms mean to them and how they would feel, like what would make them know that this is a livable, survivable community to be in or something.
Yeah. There's a few more questions. What is your understanding for the youth about Jesus's death being our salvation?
That's going to be different in different places. I don't know. The ones in my church have a similar response to me. They probably have learned from how I've articulated my theology of the cross, being that Jesus takes on the fullness of humanity, and Jesus is with us even to the point of dying with us. So there's real solidarity there. But there's a real wide variety of theologies about that. And in a world where where a teenager told me it feels like God is dying every day. I think wrestling with Jesus' death is really important.
Yeah. Let's hit these last two questions. What is, if you could generally give us an overview of what was the Mennonite approach to that youth conference that you were talking about? What was the overall methodology for that conference?
So I'm not a Mennonite. I was their guest speaker. I really appreciated their work. They had breakout sessions. They had worship, and man, they can sing. It was great. I heard very engaged questions about, as you know, Mennonites are committed to nonviolence. I heard very engaged questions of, well, is it violence to sabotage a pipeline or not? Because a pipeline's not a person. So I really enjoyed the energy at the Mennonite thing. It was a conference. It was a day-long event, and the youth participation was great. But how do we get to reconciliation with our Creator and each other? That's what we're all trying to do, isn't it?
Yeah. So when I hit this last one, what about God's creation, experiences in nature as a healing and reconnecting opportunity to know how fully it can resource us spiritually, emotionally, and physically?
Yeah. I would recommend Robin Wall Kimmerer to everybody, especially her book, Braiding Sweetgrass. And close to the beginning of that book, she says that most of her white students cannot name an instance in which humans were helpful for the earth. But all her Indigenous students have many examples. So caring for the earth is our first human vocation and still our most important one. And learning from the earth is healing for us. Being with the earth is healing for us. And I wanted not break it down into like, go to untouched nature or something like that. That is a white supremacist colonial myth, that there's like untouched nature, which is healthy. And then wherever humans have touched it, it is not good and it has no healing properties. Like the bush in my backyard, even though I planted it, has healing properties because it's part of the world. The world has great things for us to learn and feel that are healing for us, especially in this particular kind of pain. So I encourage you to look to Indigenous wisdom there and to reject the binary of natural and unnatural, and to spend time with the things around you that you have the power to take care of.
Yeah.
Directly with your hands, Yeah.
That's a great place to end. So Talitha, thank you so much for just your insight, your wisdom. Thank you for your book. It is a gift, one that I think many of us will come back to over and over again. And
this is what it looks like.
hopefully you have your copy, or your copy is on its way very soon. But thank you again, Talitha, for the hard work you've done here and for being with us tonight.
Welcome, Derek. Thank you for the excellent questions. Thank you, everybody, for your, the energy and intelligence and imagination and love you are putting into these questions in your own context.
Yes. Yeah. So thank you all for joining us. As mentioned at the beginning, you can order a copy of In Deep Waters through the link that you used for the webinar registration, and that was in the chat as well. And we want to invite you to join us for the next installment of Creation Justice Summer Reads. That'll be on August 6th at 6 p.m. Eastern. It'll be entitled Parenting for a Healed Planet, which will feature Wilson Dickinson, author of Singing the Psalms with My Son, Praying and Parenting for a Healed Planet, and children's author Laura Allery. And she'll be discussing her book Here, the Dot We Call Home. The recording of this presentation should be available in about a week, and you'll be getting an email on that. And we just want to thank you all for being a part of this series, and we hope to see you again as we continue to read throughout the summer.
Thank you.